I have not seen a more screwed up process in my time than what Jackson County homeowners are dealing with right now. Yesterday, of course, end of the month, was the final day to appeal your assessment from Jackson County. It has been one of the biggest local government debacles that we've seen in our several years here in Kansas City. And now we say hello to Missouri State Auditor Scott Fitzpatrick, who joins us on KCMO Talk Radio. And I know that, Auditor, you've received a ton of calls from concerned Jackson County residents. I know you're not involved with the process, but what do you want to make sure Jackson County residents in particular know about your office's role and what you might be doing going forward and what you can do moving forward on this?
Sure. So, one of the roles of the state auditor's office is essentially approving the tax rates of political subdivisions in the state. And while that's different from the assessed valuation, which is a function of the recorder's or the assessor's office in the various counties, our job is to ensure that once those assessments are done, that the rate that they are charging does not exceed the amount allowed by the Constitution. Which, the Constitution sets a limit on the growth of revenue that these political subdivisions can achieve in any single year. And so we look at it from that perspective. Now, there was an audit in 2021 that was released under the prior auditor's office, the prior administration of Jackson County, and specifically talked about the assessment process and found some serious concerns with that. And in that year, I think the average increase in assessed value, I believe at least on real property, was 20%, which was more than 70% more than any other county in the state. And so there was a lot of other issues identified in that audit, and the county was given a rating of fair, which is one step above the worst rating that is handed out in these audits. And so one option is we don't have statutory discretion to go audit Jackson County without either an invitation from the county legislature or a petition of the citizens, and that was what happened last time. There was the county legislature invited the auditor's office to come in, but we are looking at our options. There's a lot going on around the property tax issue, but those are some of the areas where we're involved, is either through an audit or the setting or the certifying of the tax rates.
Okay, so is there anything in the short term that you can do to alleviate the pain, or it sounds like what you're talking about is more of a long-term play to make sure the process is done correctly? But there's been a lot of complaints and stories about how the process has been royally screwed up. So which one is it on that front?
So there's an interesting kind of quirk in the way that the law has been applied. And, we're in a unique situation where the value of personal property, existing personal property, has increased significantly over the past couple of years. Normally, vehicles, boats, things like that are personal property depreciate as they age. And so you don't have an issue with, that property appreciating and raising the taxes. There is, an exemption on the revenue calculation for anything that's considered new construction. So if a city has people building new homes, that revenue associated with the new homes in that political subdivision in that city are not subject to the growth cap in the Constitution, because it's, they're adding people, they are going to have to provide services. Well, one loophole, or the way that it's been applied, is that the increase in personal property values, all of that is considered, quote, new construction, which sounds ridiculous, and is exempt from that cap calculation. So because the value of vehicles and other things like that has gone up significantly, that has increased the overall tax revenue to these, cities and counties and what have you, because that increase in property tax, or that increase in value of those vehicles, is not included in the calculation, limiting how much more the counties or those other political subdivisions can charge. So one of the things that we are looking at, and we're in the process of researching right now, is if there's anything that we can do, because I really believe that kind of as it's being applied, that statute is not really in compliance with the Constitution. Obviously, calling the increase in the value of a vehicle, quote, new construction, is a ridiculous way to interpret or a ridiculous way to interpret what the Constitution meant when it exempted that type of activity from the cap on revenue growth. So
Scott,
that's one of the things we're looking at right now.
Okay, Scott Fitzpatrick, state auditor in Missouri, joining us on KCMO Talk Radio. So anything else? I mean, would it have to be the legislature? You were, of course, in the legislature for years. As someone who was in the legislature, what would you like to see, or what can be done to make sure that folks in Jackson County are not going to get priced out of their homes going forward?
Well, I think a big piece of it, and we're kind of determining whether or not the legislature can, is needed in this action at all. But a big piece of it is not allowing the growth in personal property to all be considered, quote, new construction. Because if it isn't, if that increase is subject to the revenue cap, then that will limit how much the taxes can also go up on real property. I know it's really complicated and really confusing, but the two things, the personal property tax revenue and the real property tax revenue, are combined together to create this cap, right? And so there is a way to look at that and try to rein in what's happening on the real property side by discussing or changing how the personal property side is being treated. Really complicated, understand that, but that's probably the most realistic way of addressing it in the short term.
And what's a timeline on something like that?
Well, that's what we're looking at, and we're not sure that anything could be done this year. I would love to be able to do something about it for the current assessment period, but we're looking into whether or not that's possible. I would say next year, in the event that we determine we think we can do this on our own by changing rules, then that would be probably a next year thing. If we were going to do that. But the conclusion may be reached that the legislature does need to be involved, and if that's the case, then it would be something the legislature would have to address in the upcoming legislative session that starts in January. And
I do hope that the legislature invites your office for an audit. Do you expect that to happen in the next 30 seconds?
Well, if it happens in the next 30 seconds, I'll be surprised. But we would certainly, welcome the opportunity to look at the assessor's office again. There were serious concerns raised in the audit that was released in 2021. Jackson County has a history of over-assessing, it appears, real property in particular. And the fact that they did that in 2020 or 2019 and that assessment cycle, and that people are dealing with the same issue again just a few years later, is indicative of a bigger problem than just a one-time issue. And so I do think that it'd be worthy of further consideration and looking if the legislature would invite us in.
Auditor Scott Fitzpatrick in Missouri, thanks for all you're doing, and we'll be in touch on this issue. Appreciate it.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Scott Fitzpatrick.